All right. Welcome everyone. Good evening or good afternoon or good day, depending on what part of the world you are. So good to see you, all of you, folks who are here in person, folks who are online. Yeah, it's been a while. It's been about a month while I was on retreat, so it's good to see your faces. And so I will begin. So this evening we'll do the usual program, which means we're going to begin with a guided meditation for about 25-30 minutes. Then I'll offer some Dhamma reflection and hopefully about 30 minutes of that, maybe a bit more, depending on how many suttas we fit in there. And then we'll have time for question and answer at the end. And as you can see, we're recording there to YouTube. So usually I turn off the recording when we get to the question and answer so that folks can feel confident asking whatever they need to or sharing. But don't hesitate to let me know if you have some other concern. So please go ahead and mute your mics if you haven't already, and we will go ahead and begin to settle into the meditation. So this evening, I would like to offer very, very simple meditation on compassion. And because that's going to tie into my theme for the talk. And in early Buddhism and in later Buddhism, you find that this word compassion means the wish or the intention that beings be free from suffering, be free from harm. And then compassion takes on a little bit bigger scope in the Mahayana, but talk about that later. But for now, I want to sum all that up with the word ease. Is the intention that beings might have ease. Beings, including these beings, ourselves, and all beings, human and otherwise. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and guide us through getting settled into a posture and relaxing. It's very important to relax in meditation so that the mind can also relax and widen. And then I'll just offer this prompt of ease as a way of bringing you again and again to that intention, mind and body, your own and others. So you might begin by doing a little bit of rocking from side to side and front to back. Just loosening up any tendency to lean toward the screen or any tightness in the hips. I like to also tilt the head, loosen up the neck. And then beginning to sense the weight of the body on your seat. Observing the natural stability of the body. Relaxing the belly and allowing the body to continue to settle. Noticing the body's efforts to find balance. Those small movements are fine. Moving the attention up the spine. Coming into an upright posture as best you can. Those bones coming into alignment all the way up through the neck. And the head resting gently right over the shoulders. And knowing that the bones are carrying the weight of the body, and allow the shoulders and the chest and the neck to soften and widen. And now bringing to mind that quality of compassion. May beings be at ease. ease. Filling the body and the mind with ease. Perceptions and thoughts coming and going. There's no need to struggle with them. Just reminding yourself of the intention for ease. Recalling that quality of mind of ease. Staying with that quality of ease. Perhaps finding a place in the body where you can anchor, place where you feel that ease, that relaxed softness. Coming back again and again to that aspiration of compassion. May beings be at ease. Allowing the body to continue to settle. ease. May beings be at ease. And in these last few moments of the meditation, perhaps taking just a couple long breaths. Hello there. Beautiful. That was our meditation practice for this evening. And as I said, I hope that that will tie in somewhat to the talk that I'm going to give this evening. It's a meditation on compassion and ease, the intention or the wish for beings to be free from suffering. So now I'm going to go ahead and move right into the Dhamma talk for this evening. So feel free to adjust your posture or your camera as needed. Okay, so beginning as usual with the homage to the Buddha and the Triple Gem. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. As many of you know, I have been on retreat for about a month now, for about the last 4 weeks. I emerged from retreat on Saturday. And it wasn't a completely silent retreat. There were a couple of things I needed to take care of, so I was speaking a little bit in there, but mostly very quiet time. And as often happens in something like that, where I'm on an extended period of time without many teachings, then one thought leads to another, and this particular retreat was quite different than retreats in recent years. This one was a very intense retreat this year, and so I found myself doing some Buddha Nusati, some recollection of the Buddha, as a way of establishing a wholesome state of mind. And I also have this lovely book here from Mikhaila Robasova, who gave the book to me when she was here. I think it was in December, or maybe when she was here in October. But so I was looking at these beautiful pictures of Buddha Rupa, big Buddha statues in various parts of the world, and thinking about the Buddha. And then that led me to think a lot about compassion and the Buddha's compassion, to even get up off the seat of enlightenment and do all the work that he did after his awakening. And then thinking about compassion then led me to Avalokiteshvara, to think about the Bodhisattva of compassion. And I have a lovely statue of her, a small statue of her here in the Vihara, which I'll show you all online in a bit. But really thinking about compassion, and thinking about compassion in terms of our inner world. What does that really mean? What does that look like? And so then thinking about that, I was led very directly to the Heart Sutra. So the Heart Sutra is one of the one of the main teachings from Mahayana Buddhism, so from a branch of Buddhism that emerged at least a couple of centuries, 2, 4, 5 centuries after the Buddha. And it's basically, one way to think about it is, it's a movement that was happening within the monasteries in India at that time. And so there came to be these teachings called the Prajnaparamita. And the Prajnaparamita, that is Sanskrit, an ancient language, in which that branch of Buddhism captures most of its teachings. Early Buddhism is captured in the language of Pali, and those languages are related, but not the same. And so anyway, so the Prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom teachings, there's a whole body of them. And some folks, some scholars would say that it began with the sutta in 8,000 lines, the Ashta Sahasrika. And but then we have this very, very distilled version, the Heart Sutra, and which became very, very much used in China and parts of Southeast Asia. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about my thoughts on that, and then we'll come back and hopefully this will tie back in a little bit to some other teachings of the Buddha, meditation teachings, so that we would know what to do with this on the cushion. But for now, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Heart Sutra piece. So the Heart Sutra, so it's Hridaya Prajnaparamita, and Hridaya is a Sanskrit word also that means heart literally as an organ, but in the same way that we use in English language, the word heart can mean like the core of a thing, or the most important part, the kernel, the heart of the matter, for example. Yeah. So in this case, that's what this means. It's not really referring to the heart as an organ, I would say, but it's referring to the kernel of the perfection of wisdom teachings. And so it starts out right away with this line. And we have quite a few different translations. I'm not going to go into the whole variety of translations, and I'll spare you all that goodness unless somebody really wants to do that. But the first line of the Heart Sutra is Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Ardya Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, depending on which one you use, but in any event. Ardya Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Gambiram Prajnaparamidayam Charyam Charamano. So Avalokiteshvara is this being. And what kind of being is Avalokiteshvara? Is it what we call a transcendent bodhisattva? A being that has developed this ability to go beyond the powers of a human being and actually be helpful in a more universal way. So that's why they're called transcendent bodhisattvas. And it's an interesting concept. You know, I used to think of, and still do sometimes think of, Avalokiteshvara as like the face that we put on compassion, like the way that we can relate to compassion as embodied. And, you know, if we think about the way that karma works, because our intentions actually activate these kinds of later results, that's the kind of teaching of karma in a nutshell, then you might think, well, maybe there was some person, right, who established a very strong intention to embody compassion. And they would do that throughout their life, and that would become like the driving force of their energetic continuation, so to speak, And that would be happening life after life after life. And it would grow. And you could see how that might happen. So it's a question, I suppose. I would hold the door open about whether they represent a being or not. I refer to them as they. I hope sometimes I refer to them as she. I rarely refer to him as he, although he was originally in India, and his Sanskrit name is Avalokiteshvara. But his Chinese name you might recognize as Guan Yin or Quan Shi Yin. She's very, very beautiful, bodhisattva, very revered, awakening being. And so they were, this next part of it means, so Gambhira means something that is deep or sacred, or like profound. And then prajna is wisdom, paramita is the highest or the pinnacle or the perfection. And then we have this word moving twice, charyam, charamano. So one charyam is kind of attached to the prajna paramita. So it's like the movement, or you could say the flow of highest wisdom, right? The profound flow of highest wisdom is what they, that bodhisattva, is moving in, is coursing in, is flowing in. So the sutta begins basically with a meditation. This is a meditation on wisdom through embodied compassion. And what happens when they flow amidst highest wisdom? Well, then they see the emptiness of this body and mind. They see the emptiness of the five khandhas. Khandhas in Pali or skandhas in Sanskrit. So this first line right away is giving us many different clues. If we think about it, and particularly for a sutta where we don't know the author, I think it's very important to sort of approach it from the standpoint of what's the practice that is being recommended or that's being upheld as an ideal, right? So if we look at this first line, we start out by saying, well, clearly this practice is very powerful practice of compassion, of meditation, and a kind of meditation which is not static, not still. And which is able to, by flowing with wisdom, see something very, very important about what's happening within this body and mind. So we have a lot of pointers there about what is this very powerful practice of compassion and what it might lead to. And then we have to ask ourselves, well, what is this emptiness? But before we define the emptiness, I just want to finish the sentence. So the sentence is, discovers that the five khandhas are empty, or discovers that this body and mind are empty, and thus relieves all suffering. And thereby relieves all suffering. So it's a moment of awakening. That's the very first line. We just start right out with the conclusion. Start right out with the Big Bang. And thus relieves all suffering. And it doesn't actually even separate the suffering of the bodhisattva from the suffering of any other being. Relieves all suffering. And why is that? Well, because once you have an actual experience of awakening to the true nature, to the universal principles that are at work, such as emptiness, that applies to you as much as to anyone else. So knowing about that, waking up to that, having that experience is helpful, is completely relieving one's own suffering, but then is also in a way kind of radiating that out, is putting that out into everything. In fact, there's a book by Ayya Khema that had been recommended to me by Bhante Gunaratana, which is about some of the formless meditations and how to attain the cessation of consciousness. But separate from that, there are some other teachings in this sutta that she's walking through in this book called Who is Myself? Ayya Khema is a German nun. She's passed now, but was one of the first modern bhikkhunis that was restarting the lineage after the nuns' lineages had died out. And she says this, she says, yet experiencing our own inner peacefulness and learning how to return to it again and again is enough to change the whole quality of our lives, and not ours alone. For we all influence each other. We cannot help it. Even if we were to sit by ourselves in a lonely cave, and it's not a cave, but I was sitting by myself for a while. Even if we were to sit by ourselves in a lonely cave, we would still have an influence on the world because of the mental and emotional states that emanate from us, that flow from us. And this is pointing directly at the meaning of emptiness. So emptiness means this interconnectedness is even not a good way to put it, because that implies somehow like there are two things and there's a little rope between them. And it's not like that, actually. So perhaps the best way to state it is like non-separation. Non-separation of things. That's how much influence there is that's happening at all times. And so, and the sutta talks about this. The sutta talks about, so looking at a different translation. So that was the original Sanskrit that I was reading to you, and there's this great book by Kazuaki Tanahashi, if you have an interest in looking in great detail at the Sanskrit and how that gets translated. But looking at the San Francisco Zen Center translation, a little bit further down in the sutta, what happens is, in this sutra, that the Bodhisattva is talking to Shariputra. Now, did this conversation ever really take place? Doubtful, I would say, but this is what we have in the sutra. It's an iconic, you could say, it's an iconic way of talking about what happened. So what does Shariputra represent then? If we're talking in terms of iconic, he was the so-called general of the Dhamma. He was one of the Buddha's closest disciples. He was an extremely powerful practitioner, an arahant, fully awakened, responsible for training many of the other members of the Sangha. So he knew about compassion, and he had practiced the fact of emptiness. So this conversation is happening, you could say, between two beings, two awakened beings, right? They're kind of trading notes about that. So the Bodhisattva says, all dharmas are marked by emptiness. Or you could say they have that characteristic, right? And what do we mean by dharmas here? So dharma, as I've said many times, is a word that has many meanings. In this case, it just means phenomena, stuff, things. All things, you could say, are marked by or have the characteristic of emptiness. And then there is this very interesting phrase, which is defining emptiness here in this, the way this sutra defines it. There are many different ways to talk about it. But we'll see perhaps how they coalesce. They, meaning dharmas, things, stuff, phenomena, including your body and mind and everything that you encounter, neither arise nor cease, are neither defiled nor pure, neither increase nor decrease. So this is a very interesting teaching, because you might say to yourself, well, wait a minute, isn't Buddhism all about arising and ceasing? Right? Things are happening and we're watching them come into being, we're watching them be present for a while, we're watching them go away, whether it's a mental state or some aspect of our body, or some aspect of the environment, or somebody else's mental state. Right? Aren't things arising and ceasing all the time, or increasing and decreasing all the time? Isn't that part of what we're supposed to be studying? But what this sutta is saying is to look at it from another angle. And to look at the world from the angle of emptiness, or from that perspective, is to see all phenomena as just that. To see all phenomena as phenomena, without making distinctions. They are all just various states of conditions that are present in any given moment. So when you take a snapshot, that's an image of a particular state of conditions. But that's just one infinitesimal state of conditions, right? In a constantly flowing, moving world, which is all interrelated. We can't be here if not for gravity, and apples, and various other things, water, right? We have the causes and conditions that are necessary for a human life. Or a way to think about it metaphorically is I like to think about it like a kaleidoscope. So what you see in your mind is as if you were looking through a kaleidoscope, right? So what's a kaleidoscope? It's a long tube, maybe plastic, maybe wood, and then at the other end, it has some glitter or some bits of glass, right? Some little shiny, bright things, colorful things, small bits. And then there's some mirrors or some metal reflectors, right, that are in there. And you turn the one end, right, of the kaleidoscope, you turn the end that has the little glass bits, and the image that you see through the tube is different, right? Every time you turn it, you get a slightly different view. Maybe different colors, different shapes. You might even hear a little sound with the movement of the glass. If it's a very nice, fancy glass kaleidoscope with a wooden frame and everything, you might hear a little sound. But each turn of the kaleidoscope, there's nothing added or nothing taken away, even though it looks different, right? So one minute you might have little blue bubbles and little red bubbles, and then you turn it and you have red and yellow instead. Or you have red and blue and yellow. But nothing has actually, right? The kaleidoscope is still intact. Nothing has actually fallen out or been added in. It is simply a question of the movement. And so when we look at the world, when we look at our perceived experience of the world through this body and this mind, it's like we're looking at that kaleidoscope. We're seeing this various interrelationships shifting and changing all the time, being reflected in different ways within our mind. But if you were to look at the totality of all of existence is just simply in its flow and doing its thing and moving and changing. So that's why the view of emptiness is associated with this kind of non-separation, right? All the things are influencing each other. You can look at it from a process view over time, or you can look at individual slices and see, either way, how things are related to other things. Each thing must have its conditions. And that's actually what Ayya Khema's book is about, is this Potthapada Sutta, in which the Buddha says very clearly, he says, those who say that one's perceptions arise and cease without cause or condition are totally wrong. Why is that? One's perceptions arise and cease owing to causes and conditions. Some perceptions arise through training and some pass away through training. So he is doing, as is typically done in his form of teaching, the early Buddhist form of teaching, the Buddha focused on this arising and ceasing and having us watch that in order to learn about the conditionality. And then he later says in other suttas, I abide in emptiness. And this is how you too abide in emptiness. Right? So we look at the sort of conventional perspective of increasing and decreasing in order to see how all things are, in this way, alike, indistinguishable. Parts are parts, bits are bits, just like grains of sand, every single thing, every phenomenon you can imagine is just like a grain of sand. So the question is why? Why is that so helpful? Right? Why is that so helpful? And the answer has to do with that aspect, right? So I actually had this moment this afternoon when I was thinking about this talk of suddenly realizing this insight about how this view of emptiness, this view of there is no arising and ceasing, there is no increasing or decreasing, there is simply the non-separation of causes and conditions doing what they do, is what the Buddha spoke about. Ultimately, that total realization, that knowing that the Bodhisattva has at the beginning of the Heart Sutra, is what he called this signlessness. Right? You don't pay attention to the signs. A meditator can enter into the signlessness of the heart-mind, and thereby not be fooled by the differentiation of the world. And the reason to do that is because then you realize that this thing also is mere phenomena. You cannot hold on to a sense of a separate self in a world which is just phenomena, changing, causes, conditions, grains of sand. And that is a relief. Because the more, and we see this in the world all the time, the more that you have a sense of separation between you and the world and you and other people, the more painful it is. The more dukkha, the more anger you're going to experience. Why do people go around shooting people? Because they have reified, they have hardened their sense of separation to the point where they can't see their relationship to that person anymore. They can't see that person as another cause, another condition that's present in their life, even when they're right in front of them. So there's also a lovely sutta. I just keep throwing suttas at you tonight. Sorry about that. That's what happens when I'm, just with a very sharp mind after retreat. You're going to get a lot of material. But we can focus on whatever your questions are at the end. So in the Animito Sutta, this is so great. So this is Maurice Walsh's translation, and he tends to use a lot of old school language. But this is Venerable Moggallana, who was who was like Sariputta's brother in terms of being the other main disciple within the early Sangha, the earliest Sangha. Sariputta and Moggallana were like the two pillars of the Sangha alongside the Buddha. But anyway, so Venerable Moggallana is talking about teaching that the Buddha gave him, and he's so excited. He says, then I thought the signless concentration of the heart-mind, what is that? And then I thought, in this one, paying no attention to any distinguishing signs, one enters and dwells in that concentration of the heart-mind, which is without signs. And so then, paying no attention to any distinguishing signs, I entered on and dwelt in that concentration. But then, signs started to arise. And then the Blessed One said, no, don't slack off. Make your mind steady. I love how actually this is one of the cases, slacken off is the way that Maurice Walsh puts it, but he's actually pretty close to being more contemporary language there. This is good for him. Do not slack off in the signless concentration. Make your mind steady. And so then I was able to dwell in the signless concentration of the heart. So Moggallana is thrilled to be able to share that he had this experience and that he saw the value of being able to move beyond being fooled by the diversity of experience and seeing experience at a much, much more, you can't say unified. And this is we have to be very careful with this kind of language. It's not the unity of all things, and it's not that things are completely separate. And this is part of the middle way. This is one of the things the Buddha is very demanding of us in terms of really being able to hold this in our minds. Because we want to fall over to the side of unity. Oh, if things are not separate, that means they're all one. They're all one. It's one existence, one totality. No. The Buddha said, no, that's failing to see the side of arising and ceasing, failing to see change, impermanence, karma. Okay, then we say, okay, well then all things are separate and they're just interacting with each other. No, that is failing to see this conditionality. It's so conditional that it's not separate. So the Buddha says, so in Zen the way we often refer to this is not one, not two. Or that's why I use this word of non-separation. Non-separation. So using the mind, using our clarity about, using our ability to be compassionate beings, bring compassion to our own experience of disturbance, separation, movement, diversity, change, right? And bringing some compassion to that and some steadiness to that, we can begin to really deepen our understanding and also see what's universal about what's happening. What are the principles that are actually at work in everything that we see? How is it that this state of conditionality is so penetrating that Thich Nhat Hanh had to come up with his own word for it? He coined that word interbeing, because we don't have a proper word for it. Non-separation. Or the word that the Dhamma uses for it, emptiness. Empty of independence, empty of permanence, empty of separation, empty of a self. It sounds like it could be a problem when actually what we hear again and again, and what we see and what we can experience, if we are diligent, is that it is a relief. But it requires that. It requires quite a bit of diligence and a lot of steadiness of the mind. And the way that we acquire that steadiness is by making the mind more vast. That's why it relates also to when Moggallana's talking about this meditation on signlessness. That's one that comes after some of the very, very vast meditation states. So one thing that can help, if you're not experiencing that, which is what was happening sometimes for me during retreat, not experiencing that steadiness of mind, is to begin to experience the mind that is more vast, that is not so constrained by the details, but opening it up, trying to see the bigger picture. Open your framework. See the connections. And ultimately see how this Dhamma, this view, this experience can include everything. Because that is its nature. That is its actual nature. We don't have to make it that way. That is how it actually is. We just have to be willing to make our hearts steady and wide enough to really take that in. So, thank you. Thank you for listening this evening. Thank you for practicing. And with that, I'm going to turn off the record.